I think I'll wait just maybe one more minute or something because I see there's still a few people in the waiting room. But welcome this evening, everyone. All right, I think we'll just get started. I know the numbers might rise as the night goes on, but that's all good. So welcome tonight. We are Engineers Without Borders from the University of Guelph, and we will be hosting a NEM session on engineering with a global perspective. Just a quick note that this session is being recorded. And we don't have many slides because this is going to be a pretty casual session. So if you're comfortable, you can feel free to turn on your camera. If you get called upon during the question period, you could raise your hand and unmute or type in the chat, but we will be saving all questions until the end. And just to try and keep people engaged and somewhat connected, because I know we are virtual today. So before we begin, I'll just introduce myself. My name is Robin Jonique. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the current president of EWB Guelph. Engineers Without Borders, for anyone who is unfamiliar, is a nonprofit organization that works to create systems change here in our local Canadian communities, as well as across the globe. Specifically at Guelph, we talk a lot about advocacy, international development, and environmental sustainability. And I know we have people here from across the country, but to start off today, I'd like to acknowledge the land that I am located on here in Guelph. So I'm located on the traditional land of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Adirondack, and the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee peoples. These groups have been on this beautiful land for thousands of years. It is important for us and me, especially coming from a settler background, to remember the colonial history of this land and work towards reconciliation and building relationships. All right, Marianne, can you go to the next slide? So just a preview of what our night will look like. Our event will consist of a few questions that we have lined up for the speakers, and then we'll open up the floor to guests to ask any questions or even just share thoughts or comments. And of course, like I said, you could put them in the chat as well, and then I'll just read them out. So to start off, I'd like to introduce our panel speakers today. You can see them. Some of them have the lovely purple backgrounds. Some of them have old computers that cannot have backgrounds, but it's all good. So tonight we have Lily, Alan, Katie, and I'm not sure if Jonique is here, but she will be coming. These four are all involved or were involved with EWB Guelph or other chapters across Canada and have a variety of different backgrounds and experiences. For any students in our audience, these are all either current students or recent grads. So I think for me personally, that's something I can really connect with. And so before I introduce them, one more thing, I think it's important to go over the concept of engineering with a global perspective. I want to acknowledge that these speakers are all currently living in a Canadian setting and are just speaking from their own experiences and backgrounds. But I think still this conversation in this setting is extremely valuable. All right, so just the panelists are going to give a brief introduction, background, what kind of experiences they've had, and anything else they think is relevant before we go into the questions. So I'll pass it over to you, Lily.
All right, thanks, Robin. So yeah, my name is Lily. My pronouns are they, them. I joined EWB and advocacy back in 2017. Now I'm in my 5th and final year of environmental engineering Guelph. And in the summer of 2019, I went to Ghana and worked for an alternative protein company that grew and sold palm weevils for local consumption. And I'll be talking a little bit more about that later.
Thanks. Katie?
Hi, so my name is Katie. I am a recent graduate of the electrical engineering program at Memorial University in Newfoundland. I have been involved with the MUN chapter of EWB since 2016, and even though I'm graduated, I'm still on their community distributed team because I couldn't give up on being a part of EWB just yet. I also was in Ghana with Lily in that summer as well, but we were located in a different city, and I was working at a company called Viamo that helps use technology to speak to vulnerable populations to help understand better ways to distribute aid. Since then, I have gone to co-found a medtech company here in Newfoundland called Aeolus, which is trying to build a portable ventilator system for use in developing countries to try to bridge the health equity gap. So I'll be talking about that here tonight.
Awesome, thanks. Alan?
My name's Alan Pano. I'm a chemical engineering grad from Queens doing a second undergrad here at Guelph in human kinetics. I'm also the EWB Guelph finance executive member, and I joined EWB last year as a general member. And lastly, I'm a Canada Africa Innovation Fellowship fellow. It was a program that ran this past summer to do like a collaboration with Ugandan fellows and Canadian fellows towards trying to target and focus towards specific challenge that they were having. So my specific company that we founded is called On the Spot, trying to disseminate and propagate better sexual health information towards Ugandan youth.
Thanks. And I see Jonique made it. We are just having a little introduction right now, so you can go ahead and introduce yourself now, Jonique.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jonique Gardine. I was involved with EWB from 2015 to 2020. I met Lily during a fellowship a few years ago. And today I'm joining as one of the panel speakers to mostly discuss concepts that I learned about in my capstone project. So I finished my architectural conservation and sustainability degree in April 2020. And our capstone was working with a local we were kind of consulting with a local Indigenous community regarding what modular housing would look like when it was expanded to serve their group if the opportunity presented itself in the future, and kind of design to their needs, and then look at what that would look like when you expand sort of modular construction. Did I miss any other facets of importance to introduce here? I think probably.
I think you're good. Yeah. Yeah, just a brief introduction, like I said. So I think we will launch right into the first question of what does engineering with a global perspective mean to you? Obviously, it can mean something different to every person. There's no right or wrong, but just starting that discussion and dialogue. Katie, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. Engineering with a global perspective, I think, can mean a lot of things, but the thing that really stood out for me when I first got involved with EWB is that something that works in one place is not going to work in another place. And I don't think that means that you need to design for every single system or part of the world or different countries or every different problem that could arise, because that might not necessarily make the best product for what you're currently doing, but understanding that what you are designing or what you're working in isn't necessarily what's going to work in every single different place. And that was kind of something that I noticed when I started Aeolus, because we started it as our capstone design project, as similar to what Jonique was saying. And it was right at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. So while Canada and the States all over the news was talking about how there wasn't enough ventilators in Canada, if the cases were to rise or there wasn't enough ventilators available in the States or even in Europe, the situation was much worse in developing countries, with South Sudan only having one working ventilator at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. And if you looked at it and kind of the factors that were at play, a large thing was cost. A ventilator costs $30,000 to $50,000. A country that spends a fraction on healthcare per person that we do here in Canada can't afford that type of ventilator in the quantities that they need. So why are we only designing ventilators that only work for a certain part of the world? And that, to me, is the center of what thinking about engineering in a global perspective is. Think about your systems, try to create solutions for your specific system, but understand that it's not necessarily transferable.
Yeah, definitely. Good points. Alan, do you want to add on or some new points or anything?
Yeah, sure. I would at least frame it that engineering just gives you, or an engineering degree only gives you tools to solve a problem, but really any background can provide additional benefit to a specific problem. It's just primarily focused on what is something that you're passionate about that you want to change. So as long as you're, I think for me, it's challenging a problem in either a global scale or internationally, and usually it's collaboration with international, in an international setting as well.
Jonique?
Yeah, I really like what Katie opened with. Really, like, global perspective to me is equivalent to meaning a different perspective. So like basically trying to subtract the bias that you have out of the equation, which means you have to start by asking questions. What do you need? What are you looking for? What are your parameters? What is this project? What are the boundaries for the goal that you're trying to work for together? And it's a life learning process of how you to learn how to put your bias aside when you're addressing engineering in any perspective. So yeah, I really think global, just remember that doesn't have to be global. You could have a totally different perspective than your neighbor. I'm sure we learned that, going through the last 2 years with a pandemic and all of the other things going on globally, that things are, different day to day, that you have to think about your own personal biases when addressing any perspective that might be different from yours. Are we addressing questions in a question period or kind of as they come in?
I think we'll do all the questions at the end, but I see questions coming in the chat, which is great. Lily, if there's anything you want to add, go ahead.
Yeah, for sure. So to me, having global perspective is important even when you're not working on global engineering projects. For example, in a very local Canadian setting, you still want to be asking yourself whose voices are still not being represented at the table, and make sure that you're doing everything with a very anti-colonial lens. And then in terms of projects that do involve working outside of your own culture or outside of your own expertise, I think it's really important to go in with a beginner mindset and view yourself as, how can I support, rather than how can I take charge of the situation that I am not an expert in, and kind of recognize that while your ability to solve problems is useful and relevant, your expertise in general is often not that critical to the situation you're solving. And the more you try to bring in your beliefs, the more you might actually miss the bigger picture and miss being able to make a truly effective solution.
Well said, everyone. So we'll just move on to the next question, which is, why did you choose to get involved in the way you did? And how, if you came up with a solution, how did you justify that as being a good or the best solution to your problem? Kind of a double parter. Alan, I'll let you go ahead.
Sure. So I chose so the first one's why did I choose to get involved? I was able to seize on the fantastic opportunity that opened up during my general member stuff at EWB with the Canada Africa Fellowship. That basically was a summer course where they get to onboard you and give you all the tools necessary to start a nonprofit. So it was through that and trying to figure out and collaborating with people that had similar specific focuses. So we were segmented within a pool of candidates, and we were separated depending on the specific UN sustainable goals that resonated with us. So within our specific team, gender equality was a hot issue that we're all passionate about. And it was through both making sure we learn and hear from the perspectives of the Ugandan fellows about their lived experiences, as well as making sure you do a bunch of surveys and do a lot of like epidemiology and like population-based data to figure out like what was something that we could try to target, or what was like a pressing issue that we felt passionate about, and then use that justification also contacting back to the population that we're trying to target to make sure that we didn't kind of like lose track of what we're solving, and making sure that the problem and the solution that we ended up with was something that is actually useful.
Oh, missed the unmute button on the first try. Go ahead, Jonique.
Yeah, so with regards to answering this question from the perspective of my capstone, I chose to get involved in that because it was a continuation of a project. So one, the foundation had already been laid, and I saw a really good opportunity to see where it could go when it was already like foundationally built in a way that me and my team and my professor felt that was ethical. It was like a relationship that a student had the year before with someone from this community, and they had known each other quite well. And it was like a friendship, so to speak. So it was like sort of lending an extension of that friendship to see what it would look like to build potential in that project. So it felt a lot more of an ethical collaboration, which is why we chose to continue with it. And we justified the solution. I guess that's kind of a play on words, because I don't necessarily feel like some parts of that project or any project, when you have one group that's very different than another, should really be needing to justify themselves in the first place. There's probably, you have to take a moment there to probably understand why you feel the need to justify yourself. But we tried our best to take a very hands-off approach. So when we finished the design, it was handed over to the client. We don't have any ownership rights on it. It doesn't belong to us. You don't need to buy it or license it from us. It is your idea. You came up with this. And if you want to implement this design in the future, that is our client's decision. And we did our best to do a lot of trainings before working with the group, and we engaged with our university to get an ethics clearance, which was never heard of in any engineering capstone. And I had to fight a lot of professors on why it was necessary. And my plain reasoning was just that we were working with a vulnerable group. So that wasn't necessarily ways we justified it, but those were things that we implemented to make our project unique, to make sure we shouldn't need to be defending ourselves into why we did the things we did. And we wanted to give our client as much autonomy as possible in the whole process, and make sure we close it off with that sort of ribbon of assurance that the client can readdress this project at any time they want, because they have ownership of all the content.
That's awesome. I didn't know all of that, and very interesting. Lily, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, so I am not referring specifically to a specific project, but to talk about how I got involved in engineering with a global perspective. I think that I went into engineering really because my main focus was on the environment. That was a passion of mine, and the environment, as we all know, is a global issue. Climate change is not targeted to a specific region, and getting involved with EWB really taught me about how social issues intersect with engineering, and how really you can't solve a technical problem without understanding all the global implications. And I think that when it comes to like different projects I've worked on and things, how did I justify like which choices I made, what to get involved in? I think it's very difficult to say that what you're doing is the best or what you're doing is the right thing, but when you know that you want to help and you'll get frozen in place with trying to make sure that what you're doing is perfect and what you're doing is the most effective solution, you'll end up doing nothing at all. And so choosing to do something that's imperfect is better than doing nothing. And I think that a lot of people can apply that to the issue of global engineering, because rather than ignoring all those implications, making that step is a good idea. So
Exactly. Got to start somewhere. Katie, did you have anything to add? You are muted, Katie.
Sorry. How I got involved with starting Aeolus was that the start of my capstone project really did align with the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, but it stemmed from a place of I was watching the headlines of Canada not having enough ventilators, and because of the EWB kind of in me and the everything EWB has taught me in the sense of like thinking critically from a global perspective, I kind of did some research and noticed that there was other parts of the world that were in a much worse situation that we weren't hearing about here in Canada. And it just started off as I needed a topic to do my capstone design project in. This was something that I was very interested in. So this allowed me to get resources and money and time to put into this project. And it originally started with not talking with anyone at all, just working on this project based on the research I was doing. And it was purely meant for a grade. But once we presented the project and we did well in the IEEE night, a lot of people started asking questions and they wanted to learn more. And they didn't even realize that this was happening. And that's kind of where I would maybe say locally the most impact on this project has come from so far, because I don't have a working ventilator that is getting actually being used yet, because that is a really long, convoluted process. But this project has been able to educate a lot of people to think about the systems that are in place and to critically think about how something that is affecting you might be affecting people differently in other places, and even differently in places that are close to you that maybe just don't have the same amount of resources, or small communities, or places without hospitals, or hospitals that are far away. And I think, to go off both what Jonique and Lily were saying, that I don't necessarily think that you should ever come to the conclusion that you have the best project, you have the best solution, because I don't think there is going to be ever a solution that's like, this is 100% perfect. But like Lily said, like they said, you do need to just start somewhere, or you're never going to really get anywhere. And that's kind of something that I struggle with, of like, okay, this is 90% what I want it to be, but let's move forward. And then next time we'll innovate and we'll iterate and go from there.
Well said, everyone. The next question is, what other openings do you see for, whether it be students or recent grads or in professional settings, for people to get involved with that relate to engineering with a global perspective? And you may not have some, that's okay. But just sharing our networks and our ideas is valuable. Jonique, would you like to get started?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so opportunities for students and recent graduates to get involved with, I think, before you even look for like the perfect opportunity, figure out what you like to do, figure out what you're passionate about, and figure out what you can tolerate to do. The workforce, and then the passion force, and the entrepreneurial force are all very like diversified industries that have a lot of moving parts, and they can be, volatile and fast moving, but also really slow paced. So really, if you're going into those situations, figure out some like foundational base points of like what you're going to be interested in and what you're passionate about. If you know already what you're passionate about, then go into that direction. I think it's hard for me to say exactly to go below a high level, because I graduated in the pandemic, and I can't imagine what some of you are going through right now, where either your degree was broken up online, or you graduated online, or maybe you're starting your degree online. So the atypical network and like networking that I'm used to was, from not that high level, was going to conferences and getting involved as much as I could. And that's how I figured out what I was passionate about. That's how I figured out the kind of jobs and roles that I could tolerate and what I needed to tolerate to get me to where I needed to go. And if you are really good at understanding yourself, self-awareness is exactly what's going to lead you there a little more efficiently. And hopefully you all find things that you like to do and you don't have to tolerate something before you get to that pivot point that you really, really thoroughly enjoy something. Really, I find if you are an online university student, doing things like this and then connecting with the people during and afterwards is going to help you sort of carve those pathways that myself and Katie and Lily, because I knew them before this event, we got those opportunities at live, sort of in-person events. So if that's sort of in the direction of what you were looking for with this question, that's where I would say to start.
Yeah, and hopefully as the pandemic continues forward, I know there are online conferences still. That is a great opportunity to check out too if you're a student. I'm not sure about beyond that, what opportunities exist. But Lily, did you have any other advice?
Yeah, so when you're like looking into those clubs, if you're in university organizations, if you're a professional that you want to get involved in, like look and see what values they have and how they're exercising those values. Because I think a lot of groups do have really great principles, but then they're in practice, they aren't really doing anything at all, or maybe they're directing all of their energy towards solutions and projects that really prioritize the members of their group rather than the people they're actually trying to help. So do investigating into the actual like values and mechanisms of the organizations that you're looking to get involved in for this kind of work. And if you're already part of a company organization that you are dedicated to, a good thing to do is look into how they manage their global relationships, because maybe your position doesn't really intersect with that at all and you're not very aware of it, but looking into how they interact with other parts of their supply chain or international partners, or if a lot of the procurement that they're doing actually involves like exploiting indigenous lands or something. It's very hard to know on the surface, and doing that investigation as a dedicated member of the company gives you the opportunity to say, here's what I think we could change, here's some meaningful work that we could do, and actually gives you like a concrete entrance into this kind of thinking.
Valid point you brought up, Lily, was that like you don't have to start this work outside of your actual work. You can integrate those two things together, which I like. Katie.
Yeah, I really like what Lily was saying, because I was going to say that I know every engineering program is different, but here at MUN, we had the opportunity to do 6 co-op placements over the course of the 5 years. And I would say, don't be scared to do something that is not traditionally engineering. I know that was something that I kind of initially struggled with when I was doing engineering, because I got accepted to do the junior fellowship with EWB, and I got placed at a company in Ghana doing kind of a bit more less traditional engineering works than some of my classmates. And I remember my classmates being like, why are you doing that? Like, we're going to work at an oil company, or we're going to go work at this consulting company, and we're doing all this cool hands-on stuff. And I was doing something completely different, but it was something that it was really interesting to me. I learned a lot, and it was in line with helping me figure out what I wanted my future career to look like. I think engineers can exist in a lot of spaces. And I think engineers and their ability to problem solve make them a good fit in a lot of spaces, and able to learn from supervisors, people that surround themselves, whether it be in the sense of creating something for a global perspective, working in nonprofits. Engineers can do co-ops in nonprofits. I did it once, and I also did another one in international development. So the spaces that you can exist in are way wider than I think a lot of co-op offices or engineering places originally advertise. So don't be scared to go out and do something a little different, do something in an industry that is a little bit different than all your classmates, and you'll learn something, and it will, as Jonique said, will help you find your path. 4 months is not a super long time. Every co-op is a different learning experience, so don't be scared to take one and do something different. You might learn something.
Thanks. Alan, do you have anything else to add?
I think all these answers were really excellent. I really resonate with what Jonique and Lily were saying on just making sure you find it, like when you're interviewing at a company, not only are you trying to sell yourself to the company, but it's also important to understand what the company's values are outside of even what you're going to be doing in a specific task. Because sometimes, like there might be like differences that ultimately will affect like how passionate you are about a specific role, or if the tasks you're doing not necessarily like align with what you want to do. But I think Katie also brought a great point of sometimes you don't know what you don't know. So taking the opportunity is also a great opportunity to learn new things.
Yeah. So our next question is, do you have any advice on how to educate yourself? Obviously, this topic of global engineering, there's a lot of self-reflection and education involved. So do you have any advice on that process? Lily, I'll let you start it off.
Yeah, so the first thing that I want to say is it's very important that in the process of educating yourself, you're not tokenizing people in your life around you. You're not like, oh, I'd like to better understand, international issues. Let me ask my one coworker from a different country all about their life or something. That's obviously not great and doesn't make that person feel like a valued person in your life. But that doesn't mean that you can't learn from people around you. I think that, of course, there's lots of different ways to educate yourself. Reading things, especially staying on top of like the international news, is a really good way to delocalize your perception of the world. Not everything that's happening is happening in Canada or affects Canada, and it's still important. And I think that when you're working in diverse environments or even in school with classmates from other places, something that will really help you expand your perspective is just asking them, like, what are you learning here, or what are you experiencing here that is just out of left field? Because I think that we have like a lot of ideas about what's very normal about problem solving and doing engineering work, but to someone from a different place, they might be like, oh, that's just not how I would approach that at all. And maybe asking them how they would approach it will expand your understanding of that particular problem or problem solving in general. And I think that while you're trying to develop like global engineering solutions, look into the different mechanisms and actions you're taking, and then look into critiques of those actions and see where people have gone wrong in the past doing those things, or what easy mistakes are to make, or maybe you're just way on the wrong track and you can learn from other people's mistakes before you make those yourself.
Thanks, Lily. Katie.
Yeah, I think learning about global engineering and where all the different aspects, because global engineering is just such a crazy big term. But the one thing for me that really stood out as moments where I felt like I was learning a lot was just attending different conferences. Specifically, EWB conferences have been ones that have really stuck out to me, where you get that experience of getting to hear someone else's perspective that may have lived in a different country or worked in a different country or is from a different country, without, as Lily was saying, going up and asking them because they're your colleague at work, because that's not really a great position to put people in. Hearing from the people that are affected by a problem you're trying to solve, or exist, and as Lily was saying, thinks about things in a different way, is, I think, maybe the place that I've learned the most. And it's also a great starting point from those conversations, from those sessions, from those presentations. You can go and you can do your own Googling. A lot of times people will be like, go check out this resource, it's really cool. Or if you go to an event, people will be like, did you check out this Instagram page? Like it keeps you up to date with news that is happening in these places. And that is just passively being interested in learning stuff, listening to stuff, and then being like, oh, I'd love to learn more about that. And then kind of going down your own rabbit hole to do your own research, and then talking to people about it later is the way. And, you'll never stop learning, and even though someone might have been thinking about this for 5 years, they're still have mountains of stuff to learn. So everyone is on their own journey to get as much knowledge as they can to learn about different things. And you'll constantly be learning something and then unlearning it because something else is more relevant or something else is more true. So don't be too hard on yourself, but make sure that you're doing it in a respectable way, and make sure you're not kind of making anyone feel like, oh, I should ask you this because you're from a different country, because that's also not appropriate.
Thanks, Katie. Alan?
Yeah, I think the fact, or at least when we're chatting with people, attending conferences like this is excellent. I think also joining teams of like-minded individuals can also help in just like kind of building that repertoire of knowledge or things that you may find interesting, or learn new things that you didn't even know were a problem. And outside of that, after you start actually implementing a solution, that's where I would say, yeah, trying to interact with the stakeholders and the ultimate people who are going to be benefiting from that. It's always important to make sure you maintain the true north of your project and you don't kind of lose sight of that. Yeah, networking is very important, and yeah, keeping those relationships and making sure that you take advantage of any opportunity that comes up. Like my Canada Africa Innovation Fellowship was just an email from the EWB chapter last year, and I decided to just apply, and it was a fantastic experience.
Jonique?
Yeah, I really agree with everything that everyone already said. Really well put, and a lot of great points. The only thing I really had down for this question was to never stop. Never stop educating yourself. And I really appreciate Katie's mention of learning and unlearning, and remembering to find that balance of like, it's really important to never stop educating yourself, but also practice enough self-awareness that you know when you need a break. Information can be really overwhelming, and we are part of the the age of information generation. So I really don't think it's going away anytime soon, and the internet is only becoming increasingly accessible. So yeah, really never stop. There's so many resources, so many people, and so many stories to hear. We're never going to have enough time to learn them all. So find a good balance between mixing like, hey, I want to learn about this thing that's going to help me do this better, but also I try to mix in, random things. It can be really small, from like spending a week doing Duolingo on a language I'm never going to learn to speak, because that's super random and it feels like it's working out parts of my brain that I don't do on the daily, to then asking my work to pay for a course that I want to do because that's going to help me day to day in my job. And I know that I'll learn a much more in-depth perspective, to things like, I really do agree with what Lily said. Make sure if you're learning from somebody else, that you're compensating fairly. As a student, obviously you want to try to tap into those resources where a organization or a company is sort of funding an educational resource. But in this day and age, we really want to focus on like decolonizing educational spaces, and that includes like making sure that the people who are sharing their knowledge are being like fairly treated in all the ways that they want to share that knowledge, or may have to be in a position where they feel that they have to share that knowledge. So whether it's you working on a project with the client and agreeing to have a deliverable, and they've shared something of detail to you that would change the way you would deliver a project, that form of compensation may be following up and holding yourselves accountable to make sure that you don't make those same mistakes, and then also follow through on your commitment in that project to make sure that you're holding up the agreement in a really in the most equitable way possible. So that's all I have for that one. Thanks.
Oh, that was well said. Thank you, everyone. And yes, we are all just on this very beginning of our educational journey in this process. We have one more question tonight before we open up the chat and get the audience to ask some questions. And our final question is, what tips do you have for communicating with audiences or group members that may be from a different place or have a different perspective than your own. Katie, I'll let you start it.
Yeah, so through Aeolus, I've definitely had to master the pitch of why this product should exist. And through that pitch, you have to provide background on why this product is even needed. And a lot of the times, what I've really noticed is that people don't know this is an issue, but then are also pretty immediately on board, because if it makes sense that, you know, solutions should be made so that people have access to equitable healthcare, but people might not know that this is even an issue. So my way of approaching it is just kind of fully starting from the beginning. Some people might have different levels of background on the thing that you're talking about, and but normally when you're pitching to the general kind of entrepreneur world, it's not really super known. It's a lot of bankers, lawyers, engineers, just general entrepreneurs. So giving all of the background in a non-confrontational or non-judgmental, that they don't know that information, and just giving it the facts, giving them all the pieces they need to understand it, and then presenting your argument or your reason for telling them this, or what you kind of want out of this conversation is the best way that I've found to present this, specifically when I'm talking about when I'm trying to sell Aeolus. And that is overall something that I found works really well. If you come from a place of like, I know this and you don't know this, and why don't you know this? Because this is obviously important, they're never going to listen to you. It's going to be very defensive, and the conversation is not going to go very far. But just presenting it in a way of like, did you know that this is happening? And if you compare it to something that is also happening in the place that they live, so comparing ventilators in sub-Saharan Africa to ventilators in Canada, they'll be like, wow, that doesn't match up. Why not? And then going from there is the way that I've learned. But presenting to different people, different like engineers, they often want to learn more about like the technical aspect of things. So understanding your audience, but also starting from scratch is the best way that I've found to get people on board without making them feel stupid because they might not know that information.
Thanks. Alan?
Yeah, I think from my own perspective of collaborating with an international group of both Ugandan and Canadian fellows, I think it's important to recognize that there are some infrastructure privileges that you might not even think are issues, but we, through our summer working together then this entire year, understanding that sometimes we have to be flexible and move around constraints that you might not have thought that were constraints, like between like internet or electricity blackouts, or trying to like coordinate having meetings with people around these challenges that sometimes disrupt when we're having these meetings, outside of the fact that at least if you're trying to work with people from Africa, you have a massive time gap. So there's all this scheduling balance. So I think it's about being patient and to get earnest feedback. I think at least like for our team, it was important to build like a good personal relationship. So we established a good platform for everyone to feel safe and provide their own feedback. So I found like, because the Canadians' internets were better, I felt like at the beginning we were leading the conversations, just because maybe the Ugandan fellows, like the internet was kind of choppy and stuff. So it's about maintaining that flexibility and providing additional ways to maintain that equal platform. That way, everyone's voices don't get an equal amount of weight.
I like that. Definitely recognizing what privileges we have when we're talking and communicating with others is important. Jonique?
Yeah, when it comes to audiences, I would say using as many types of learning and engagement tools as possible. So we all have like different learning types. Some of us are more like auditory or visual, or I think, like everyone learns better by doing things. So I've found really useful tips when it comes to communicating with full audiences where you have no idea who's going to be in those seats, is finding various ways to communicate the information, and it's not all sort of plateaued throughout your communication style. So by choosing different ways to engage with the audience throughout, you're more likely to have people engaged, even if it's for smaller segments. You're more likely to have the person that's way better with visual pay attention to the diagram you made, or in the maybe the audience, you have them participate in your presentation, and that's the part where they remembered because they watched that engagement happen. So applying different learning styles to the way you communicate can really help when it comes to big audiences. But I really agree with what Katie said. Knowing your audience is really important. So if you're in a smaller group and you have, members that are, from a different place or have a different perspective than your own, asking questions that are structured in a how kind of manner really helps break the ice in a really humble manner. Like, how can we come up with meeting the goals for this group in a way that we're all comfortable in contributing? How can we fix this problem together? How can we work together? Or how would you like me to address this problem? Or how would you like me to develop my perspective to be able to come to the table so we can come to a consensus? Really, it's just about talking to people and creating an open dialogue that's as least abrasive as possible. Obviously, that gets better with age, and a group meeting and communicating with a group member is a lot different in university than it was when you were in grade 3 trying to divvy up construction paper and stuff like that, depending on your school situation. So yeah, I think like just being kind and working on different communication styles to try to aim to be able to communicate with people in the most sort of inclusive way possible is a good tip there. Yeah.
Thanks. Lily, why don't you finish us off?
Yeah, so I kind of answered this question from the perspective of like working in a group where you're the only Canadian or whatever, and everyone else in your team are people from very different contexts or whatever. And I think that the first thing I wrote down was like, don't assume your ideas are that different, because I think that once you're working on a team with individuals, you probably have a lot more common ground than your geographical and cultural differences might lead you to believe. And I really liked what Katie said about starting from scratch in those scenarios, because if you all build up to the same level together, then you ensure that no one's been left behind. I think that it's a really good idea to know the group that you're talking to, and if you're like, oh, like I want to talk about this topic with this group of people, but they have a different background than me, get to know what their ideas about that topic are in advance, so you know where they're coming from, and give tangible examples that relate what you're saying to what they've experienced. So, maybe you want to talk about a specific type of technology, and you're implying how it would be a benefit to Canadian society, but that doesn't make any sense to the group of people from Thailand that you're trying to explain it to. So then fitting your ideas to their context is very important in ensuring the communication is actually effective. And I think that if you're in a group and you're trying to get through and it's not working, the best thing you can do is have them explain to you what they think you're saying, and then you can kind of identify where those misunderstandings are before it turns into a big argument of you're not paying attention to me or whatever, because a lot of the time those misunderstandings are purely mistakes and not anyone having bad intentions.
Yeah, thanks. I think everything was really well said throughout all those 5 questions from all the panelists. We do have comments and questions in the chat, so I can start with those, but if you would prefer to unmute, you can just raise your hand, and then I can call on you when the schedule works out. So the first question in the chat, I think it was actually addressed to Jonique at the time that it was submitted. but what biases did you have to address? I think this was in relation to your capstone project.
Yeah, I guess instead of sort of listing off like the hundreds that I probably came across at the time, I'll do one. There's one quick story that kind of summarizes how many when everyone in my group realized how many biases we had. But we decided to do a design charrette with our clients. So we brought forth the design from the previous year and met with them in person. This was like their director of energy and the rest of the band council. And we presented what the previous design was and how we had wanted to change it for the purposes of achieving what our capstone goals were, and then put those aside so that they understood what the context was, and then said, but what, let's turn this around. What do you need? What are your wants? And they shared a lot with us, not only making like design iterations, but also the nuances that we didn't have that they were experiencing in that area. And one of them was when it came down to like budget and paying for it and who would complete the work. So in this particular community, and I believe it's across, if not Ontario, all of Canada, but the contractors who work on reservation have to get paid before they do the work. So this leaves huge gaps in scope, work completion, quality of work. And we were all like completely shocked and didn't realize that we had the bias of like, this is how construction works. It's ABC to Z, and there's no other way that it's done. And people follow through and people get it done, and the schedule stays on time. And we didn't even realize that that was a possibility. And here, that was kind of like a huge bias that we had. And now we had to address like, okay, who is going to do the work? How do we make sure that's not how payment's done? How are we going to find contractors that would maybe agree when it's been done a different way before this? And that was just, that really was when we all kind of hit the wall and realized everything we thought about how to run a normal project with a client was going to be completely flipped upside down because of the history of colonization and corruption that exists across Canada, and the despair and like impoverished communities and positions that people have been put into, that Indigenous people have been put into. So that was sort of the biggest moment for us, where we realized that we all had a lot of biases just because of our privilege and background and not growing up on reservation. And that pretty much, I think, summarizes sort of the cascade of biases that we would have had underpinning that.
Thanks. I think storytelling is an especially powerful way that we can learn about global engineering. So it's great to hear a story. If any of the other panelists have anything to add about biases that they've addressed, you can go for it right now. If not, we can move on to the next question. All right, I'm seeing nods, so we will just continue forward. I'll read out the next comment from Matthew. Is in civil engineering, and this is a problem that they've constantly seen with bringing clean water to developing countries. Many well designs have one of two problems. They either require a lot of spare parts and skilled maintenance that the third world doesn't have the tech base for, or they're simple pit walls that quickly suffer from contamination. And I think there's a continuation on that. I will scroll down later to see, but I think that is definitely something that I've thought about. And I think maybe, I don't know if any of the panelists have anything to add on to that, because I know that's kind of a fundamental thing. The first thing I learned, not the first thing I learned, but one of the things I learned in EWB was that just building a well is not the solution to the problem. So maybe training people to do maintenance or things like that is how you can actually create long systemic solutions. If any panelists want to jump in, you can go ahead. If not, I'll keep scrolling through the chat.
Yeah, Robin, I think just building on off your point, that's exactly what the fellowship was focused on, is about like designing how to make social ventures. So instead of providing like a specific population with like a solution. You're trying to generate a company that's self-sustaining, but its main focus is towards the betterment of society in one specific key way. So that way it's self-sustaining, so it doesn't necessarily need investors or stakeholders, which might change their focus later down the line. And it's something that can be owned by the local population and would have a lot more pull and hopefully, lengthen the time that it works for.
I had a
Yeah.
interesting, oh, sorry, go ahead, Lily.
I was just going to say, to echo what Alan was saying, the best thing you can do is empower community to dig their own well and maintain their own well rather than give them the well and walk away. But go ahead, Katie.
Yeah, I had an interesting anecdote that ties together the last two questions. In my first year of engineering, I had a prof named Dr. Suzanne Hurley, and she was kind of my introduction to EWB because she had done projects earlier in her career in East Africa with this exact thing, to build wells that would be sustainable within communities. So she worked with this all engineering team that had no one from the local companies that they were working in, and then thought they had this brilliant idea of putting a well in place. And then they were going to educate the women of this community using these classes and seminars to be able to do maintenance on the well. So it was going to be this perfectly, tied up with a bow. It's not going to fall apart. The women traditionally were not going to work anyway, so they could all learn the skill, keep the well going if something were to go wrong. And then she's like, so they hosted the first seminar, and they were paying all the women for coming to learn the seminar. And one of the women said, "You can pay me, but I'm not actually going to do this when the time comes, when the well breaks down." Because traditionally in the place that they were working in, the women didn't do this type of hands-on labor. It was the husbands and the men and the sons had to do this traditional hands-on kind of physical labor. So she realized that, oh, wait, what? This doesn't work at all. This project is going to fail if we're going to educate all these women and then they are not going to fix it because of traditional roles that they were placed in. Then we're wasting a lot of money. And that was her light bulb moment of, wow, look at all the biases that I have. We didn't talk to anyone in the community. And this failure of a project is completely our fault. And she told the story. And then she said, like, imagine all the biases that exist in you, and you are just starting. She was already well into her career at this point. And then she went, go to EWB. They will talk about this more. So that was really my starting point of being like, whoa, I definitely do have those biases. I thought that was a really good idea when she was saying that. And then it kind of led me and started that think project of, wow, how does all of this really work together? We clearly don't know everything from here in my Newfoundland engineering class.
Thanks. And I see that somebody also asked, how did these factors get taken into consideration when EWB empowers local communities? I think we just touched on that in all of those answers, but if anyone has anything else to add about specific empowerment in local communities, you can go for it. Yeah, maybe we covered that already directly before this. So as we keep going down, there's a few comments. I won't read everything. I see that somebody is actually a professor from Nova Scotia, and they love our key points and want to talk about them in their first year engineering class. Very similar to Katie's experience right there. Do you have any tips for their students on how to get involved with EWB? I personally don't know what the situation is in Nova Scotia. Maybe Katie, Lily, you know what's going on?
I don't think there's currently any active chapters in Nova Scotia. I could be wrong, but I don't know exactly what university you're teaching in, but EWB has had a chapter at Dal before and is really trying to get a chapter at Dal again. So I guess my only advice would be to, if you have students that are interested in getting involved with EWB, they could start their own chapter. They could reach out you could reach out to probably any of us here on the panel and we'll connect you to the right person. and they can start a chapter from scratch, or they can get involved with something that like Alan did, where the Canadian African Innovation Fellowship, or just going to different EWB events. I don't know if I covered that all correctly, but I think that's what's currently happening in Nova Scotia.
Lily, do you have any other insights?
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add to that. I was going to say there used to be a great DAL chapter. There might be still a couple of people hanging around, but the rest of the schools in Nova Scotia, I don't think have ever had a chapter. So it's a great opportunity to start. Engineers Without Borders, despite everything we have just been saying, is not just for engineers. So if any of you have other students that are interested in this kind of international development focused problem solving, direct them towards EWB. It's a great club.
Exactly. Maybe I can throw my email in at the end. Just feel free to reach out if you want resources or want me to connect you with somebody. EWB does have a national office, so that kind of governs all the chapters. So I can definitely connect you to the right people there. From Julia, we have the question, do you think institutions should do more in engineering programs to introduce students to global perspectives? I see Jonique nodding if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so overdue. But not just global, like national. Again, like there's so much change that's been overdue in the engineering industry. That's just my personal opinion for a long time. And we are kind of in a phase or a generation right now where I think we're all going to be responsible for playing catch up. So when it comes to more sustainable design, code changes, and then also just getting away from I actually was joking with this with the structural engineer at work this week during his site review, but he was like, right now we're still in this traditional phase of engineering and design, and before traditional, it was archaic. So, and I couldn't agree with him more. There's been like these two stages, and we're just sort of maybe starting to break through to the next one. At least, you know, I'm young, so my opinion is a little bit ignorant. I haven't been in engineering for 30 plus years to watch a change happen, but that's all of our input is going to be valid, and we are making space for ourselves to bring more perspective. I think some universities, I know when I went to Carleton, they offered these courses that covered they were like world topics. They were called I'm pretty sure they were called global engineering, but maybe not global engineering. They might have renamed it before I left, and they'd offer like 3 topics, like economics, the environment, and politics, but it would count as an engineering credit, and you wouldn't just learn about stuff in Canada, you'd learn about stuff abroad. So I know some universities are jumping on the bandwagon, but if you are going to school right now and you have a relationship with your admin, you can make the push for this kind of stuff. You can find the people. We had lots of conversations with our professors about making changes to coursework and adding in electives that would be valid and count towards your degree that were not eng-based. That wasn't the case when I went to school, and I took a lot of non-engineering courses and just bit the bullet that I wasn't going to count towards my degree. But it was important to me to get different perspectives. So don't feel like you're tied down to your course tree if you want to learn outside the box and you want to learn in that structured way that university does a really good job at offering. Yeah. That's my 2 cents.
Thanks, Jonique. Does anyone else from our panel here have any other insight for that question?
I would fully agree with what Jonique was saying, that sometimes it might not be necessarily included in your courses, but if you can try to put courses like that in your electives or any other choice that you have. I know that the woman I was talking about earlier, Dr. Suzanne Hurley, teaches a course at and actually made it an elective that all students have to take. And it's called, I just Googled it to make sure I got the name right, but it's called Technology, Sustainable Society and International Development. And it was crazy what people were taking away from that course, because like it didn't cover a whole lot, but it made people think. It didn't provide solutions or anything like that, but just being like, I think it can also just not even be its own course, but just implemented in the way that certain courses are taught. I think would be fun for projects that you have to work on or labs that you have to do to have like certain constraint or have to be designed for a certain situation that we might not necessarily see in Canada, but see somewhere else. And getting students to think that like the way that we do things is not the only way to do things, and giving that ability to problem solve and find solutions that they might not have considered before. So maybe if you have someone in your university that is interested in learning more, that is interested in providing these types of resources, like tell your faculty, tell people that you want to see this within your school. I know that we were lucky that we had a prof that was interested, but because people were interested in doing that course, they then made everyone do the course, and they've seen a positive impact from that. So let people know, or get EWB in your chapters to let people know, or something, because you know, just interest might get more of that stuff available.
Thanks, Katie. I think also, just to add on to that, I know I'm not a panelist, but I just think sometimes reaching out to staff is intimidating, but if you reach out to your like student council or something like that, even that is a great first step to making those strides forward. I think the next question, since EWB is an organization and each institution has their own events based on their own schedules, should there be events for EWB for all institutions of Ontario? I think the answer is yes, and pre-COVID more so this existed, I believe, but I'm definitely all for it. And if your chapter wants to collaborate with Guelph, we can arrange something. If any of the panelists have anything else to add about that, go for it.
I'm sure EWB has conferences planned, but we had tri-chapter conferences between Carleton, Ottawa U, and Queens. And I'm pretty sure the schools in Southern Ontario had it too. And then national conference includes everybody. So I'm sure they're on the way. Just pandemic pending, right?
Yeah, exactly. We did have a national conference back in January, which is like an annual thing. And then smaller groups typically meet throughout the year, but that's really up to the chapters and usually like in your region, what the other chapters in the region are up to. I think we're back to the well issue again here. And Dr. Enoch, I'm going to guess, says, I would disagree that training people to do maintenance addresses systemic issues. What if those people you trained are no longer available? Does anyone want to address that?
I think Alan's been doing a pretty good job in the chat, but I would just say that there's no solution that is going to work in every circumstance. And the best way to design solutions is by putting the circumstances first and adapting everything else for that. So yeah, it might not be sustainable everywhere. It could be sustainable somewhere. It might look different depending on who's doing it. But if you go in with the idea that you want it to be sustainable and you want it to work for the people it's serving, then you will have all the tools you need to identify a effective solution.
Good catch. I hadn't scrolled down that far in the chat yet. And thank you, Alan, for addressing those questions. If anyone else in the audience has any other questions, feel free to raise your hand. Oh, we have one right there. Answer Deep. You can unmute or type whatever suits you best.
Hi everyone. It's a nice conversation. I like every point of view everyone gave that in this. But I have a question. Like in today's world, like most of thing is based on profit. Every organization or every entrepreneur, they want to make more money. Like how you can put your idea, which is non-profit, or which one like to save Earth or to challenge the global warming, but they can't do it because they have on their basis to make more profit. So how you can start that idea without like getting that much help, which is totally based on non-profit idea. So I have a question for that. Thank you.
This is probably something that I can kind of answer with my journey through AOLIS. So AOLIS is not a nonprofit, but I think there's a lot of ways to still be not a nonprofit, but still be a sustainable organization. And I understand that a lot of the way that the world works, the entrepreneurship works, is about making the most amount of money that you can in the shortest amount of time. And I think that that might have to be slightly put aside if you would like to create sustainable solutions to certain issues in the world. And some people are willing to do that, and some people are not willing to do that. And I hope there is lots of people that are willing to do that. When I was looking at the issue that arose with the lack of ventilators in developing countries, there was something that was very consistently shown, and that was that companies do not want to create ventilators that are cheap because they don't make as much money. The process of going through medical accreditation on a product, especially here in Canada and especially here in the States, is very, very long and very, very tedious. And the design and that process doesn't get any cheaper if your prototype is cheaper. So whether you're creating something that you're planning to sell for a couple $1,000s or you're creating something that you're planning to sell for $50,000, that process is the same price. So why would someone spend a bunch of money and then at the end of the day sell something for way less when they could sell something for way more? And there's an entire gap in the market in so many things because of that exact reason. And I think that just comes down to someone needs to be willing to take that bit of a hit in not making as much profit. Like I personally would be very, very happy with this project going forward and me not becoming a millionaire and me creating a solution that would be sustainable and used. And maybe I'm naive, but I am very okay with that personally. And I think there's more and more resources, I think, coming out through funding agencies, through investments, through venture capitalist funds that are interested in supporting ideas that are based towards creating those types of solutions, I think in a way that we haven't seen before. I still think there's way more work to be done, but there is government programs, government funding that are interested in supporting that. So I think we just need to create engineers that are that globally minded so that they can take what they learned and create solutions that are a bit more unique with a bit less focus on profit, that are, interesting and sustainable and that work. So maybe that was a bit of a long-winded process, but it's something that I've noticed a lot through this journey. And I'm very passionate about because I feel like everyone I talk to is talking about the money and I'm like, okay, well, maybe we can put that aside for a second because I don't need that amount of money personally.
Thank you, Katie. Actually, it's true. Like I talked to somebody too, but the main focus is always on money. Like now, our young or teenager or everybody, they are all focused like how we make how we become a millionaire in just a little bit of time. So I think it's good to have a change in a society where we are not focused only on money. We have to focus on our environment too, because I think 2-3 weeks ago I'm in a webinar too, which is like they talk about environment, global warming. So they said like we already crossed the line, which one we can solve it. Now we just can make a change in our living style, because we already changed the global warming scale. Like it's already crossed the limit. So I think so it's a great idea. Thank you.
Thanks for that question. I just threw the Guelph chapter email address in the chat. If anyone, particularly that professor, wanted to reach out, you can feel free to contact us. I see Alex added another question. What unique challenges did our panel members face due to the fact that they were working in a context or culture they hadn't experienced before? And was there a learning curve that you didn't expect? Anyone can take it.
Sure, I'll jump on mine. just because, at least like from my perspective, I came from a developing country. So for it seems silly, but I had to realize that my own lived experience as someone who lived in a developing country was different to the experiences that my coworkers in Uganda were dealing with. So in that case, it was like having some commonalities in some of the struggles that like either me or a familiar member had, but also understanding the differences and trying to see their entire experience as a whole. That way I wouldn't come in with these preconceived biases, not just only from me as a Canadian, but also me as someone who comes in from a developed country. So that was something that I found very insightful and I thought was very good in understanding and learning.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. If any other panelists, oh, Jonique, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to just add that in my situation with Capstone, I think our whole team sort of expected a learning curve regarding the topic and the engineering behind it and consultation and what it looked like to work with a client where ethics was the priority. But I think the learning curve that we didn't expect was the one reflected upon ourselves. I didn't realize that till a few months into the project, where I might have put some people in some really tough positions as the project lead that I didn't mean to, where people kind of began to seemingly spiral on their own self-reflection, which in a space where you have the time to give yourself can be really healthy and really good. And in your final year capstone can sometimes just add more stress. So definitely self-awareness is really important. And I've found since school, having the space and the time where you're not being bombarded to take to reflect with yourself I know has made and will make things like those learning curves in the future a lot easier, but it will never be sort of 100%. And that's the point, is that you want to keep that learning curve. You don't want to make it to the finish line of a learning curve sort of ever. And the biggest challenge was, I think, everybody tackling the learning curve with themselves, not necessarily the context. There's always a lot to learn. I guess when it comes to the context of our project, the stuff that we were all surprised about was how deeply entrenched the systemic racism and colonialism is still very present and alive and active. And that part was a surprise to all of us. But we expected sort of the rest just from taking courses and just having that general knowledge that we received elsewhere in other places in our involvement. But it was the personal learning curve and sort of the reality check of Canada's history that caught us off guard.
For me, so one thing that comes to mind is that I feel like we have this very like polished kind of snobby idea of what engineering is in Canada and how it happens. And when I was working in Ghana, we were trying to develop prototypes and we got hit with this very hard constraint of like materials are harder to access a lot of the times, and also a lot of financial constraints that materials for that type of work that would be the like specific type and quality materials that we would access in Canada weren't like realistically accessible to us. And so we had to pivot and use materials that we bought at the local market or whatever to design our prototypes. And like, were they less effective than expensive prototypes? I don't really think so. Like the materials we used completely served our function, and maybe it didn't look like the engineering projects you would take on here, but in essence, they were the same. And I think that is a bit of a learning curve to be like, okay, all these like flashy ideas we have about engineering are not important to the meat and potatoes of problem solving.
Thanks, Lily. If anyone else has any last questions, we might have time for one more. If not, I don't see any other hands up. I will have Marianne share our last slide. All right, so I think I see it up there. So on behalf of EWB Guelph, I'd like to thank everyone for attending tonight, especially our panelists. Thank you for taking time out of your day to share your insights with us, but also to our whole audience for being so engaged. We hope you enjoyed the session, and hopefully you've begun to think and reflect on how some of these things that we talked about today play a role in your own life. We'd also like to thank the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers for organizing them this year and getting all these conversations and networking events together. And lastly, a very special thank you to our NEM partners, which are up here on the slide. I know it's almost the end of National Engineering Month, but there are still a few more events in the next few days, so feel free to check them out on nemontario.ca for more information about the times and dates and what the events are. But that's all we have for this evening. So thanks for joining us, and I hope you have a great evening.